All right. Transmart-batch.
Welcome everyone.
Welcome everyone about this presentation about transmart-batch. This aims to be a replacement for the current ETL procedures in Transmart, but it won't replace them anytime soon. So it's just one more to add to the pile. This was started being conceived around the first or second quarter already. So, but because we're a big company now, it took this long to have something to show. The implementation was mostly Carlos and I who wrote it, mostly exclusively. But we had some discussions with Roslan and Yannick a few months ago. This is the outline of the presentation. I'll start talking about the current status at the school. Then I'll talk about a bit about SpringBatch, which is the project framework that transmart-batch uses. Then I'll talk about transmart-batch itself. I'll have one slide about the cross-trial implementation, and another one about future work. Right now we have three main ways to load data into Transmart. We have a mixture of cattle that reads the files and then calls the input files and then loads data into Oracle or Postgres and then calls stored procedures in case of Oracle or functions in case of Postgres. We have an alternative developed by Thomson Reuters called TM data loader, which replaces cattle, but not the stored procedures, and also adds some features like progress. It shows the progress and it shows the log as it's written, but we never use it here. And as I'll mention later, cattle is not the biggest problem. It's one of them, but this code is actually, I looked at it, it's actually quite well written. It's written in Groovy, but it still only solves half of the problem. And then we have Transmart Loader, which is a project that is not really a replacement for any of these two. It's more an alternative way to load data in Transmart. It's also written in Groovy. The code quality is much poorer than the Thomson Reuters code base, for instance. But it's mainly used for dictionaries right now. It started with being able to load SNP data and gene expression to region variants, but this never actually worked with the open source version. Then we have some supplemental tools which are not really about data loading itself, which we have FCL for Transmart, which is an SAP application developed by Sanofi, mainly in Charlotte, I think. But it's more about preparing input files, so modeling the input clinical data. It also has support for launching the ETL procedures. We don't really use this application. And we have the Transmart data, which is what we use. Its focus is on downloading the data sets and invoking the data loading procedures. So cattle. Cattle is one of the things that we wanted to do away with. The reason cattle is, well, otherwise fine for software, but there are several problems with it, at least as applied to our situation. We have no expertise in this software, and neither does anyone in the Transmart community. It's difficult to debug. Basically, you have to get down to the Java code and attach a Java debugger. So there goes the abstraction. You actually end up having to know about cattle internals to to do serious debugging. This is one of the biggest problems. Cattle jobs and transformations are done with a graphical user interface, and these are saved into XML files, which are huge, where the positions of each item in the interface are saved, so the diffs are completely unusable. It's impossible to do merges. In some it's not really VCS friendly. Then because you build all the steps using the cattle primitives, you can write your own, of course, but then there are other problems. You have to manage the deployment of these plugins that you write, and so on and so on. Because of this, because you don't have you can write steps with JavaScript, but actually. I don't see that used a lot, so you end up with a lot of steps doing trivial things, and it's difficult to figure out what's going on at a high level. Finally, cattle doesn't always reports always at least kitchen, which is the command line interface to run cattle jobs, always exits with 0, which is not very good to run batch jobs, to run unattended scripts. And finally, this is not so much a problem of cattle itself as it's well, what can I say? A mistake from the part of people who wrote this cattle jobs information, that they are completely duplicated between Oracle and Postgres. So the cattle job transformations for Postgres and Oracle look almost the same, but instead of those different parts being abstracted away in some way, they are just copied over. So this means when you want to make some change, you have to make them in cattle files in both sides. Nevertheless, cattle is not even the most problematic portion. The most problematic portion are the stored procedures and functions. This is where I see more trouble arising from. It's undeniable that they have some advantages. We have the code very close to the data, so the communication with the database is minimized. You put the data in the staging area, and then you just run the stored procedures. And there are some performance advantages that you can beat related to type conversions. You can deal with the database types directly without type conversions, without serializing data to pass them through some sockets. However, a lot of problems. We have a lot of problems with stored procedures. First of all, and this applies also to other database changes, we still have no mechanism to apply these changes, so we commit them and then they have to be applied manually. We need to keep one copy for Oracle and one copy for Postgres. Postgres has a language called PGSQL, which is sort of but not really compatible with PLSQL. So there is a lot of doing a conversion takes some work, and more than that, there's also then the maintenance of work of keeping the two in sync. In practice, they end up frequently not being in sync. Testing this is well, it requires a setup database, so there are no unit tests for any of these. And the implementations are very difficult, are very opaque. Everything is an SQL statement. It's not very easy to devise what's going on, even with the comments. It's difficult to debug. You can debug it. I mean, you can put some breakpoints and step through the code, but you can't really, at least in Postgres, you cannot really inspect. You cannot run arbitrary expressions in the middle of debugging sessions, for instance. I'm not sure about Oracle. And in case of Postgres, you also need to load a separate module. We have it in our repositories, but it's not very practical. And the scripts have huge amounts of boilerplate for logging, especially in Postgres, because Postgres doesn't really have stored procedures without db-link, so you cannot just do commit in the middle of a function. You have to start. You have to actually use which are essentially save points in the middle of of the sort procedure of the function in case of Postgres. Completely moving on. I'm going to talk about SpringBatch, which is a framework developed by SpringSource with the help of Accenture. Yeah. This is how they describe it: a lightweight, comprehensive batch framework designed to enable the development of robust batch applications vital for the daily operations of enterprise systems. Very inspiring. The traits of batch applications are well, the most simple definition is something that you want to run without human intervention. But some traits of batch applications are handling a large data volume, automations, and this ties in with the other points. So we want to minimize human intervention except for serious problems. Robustness, tolerance for invalid data. We can see already that these two don't really align very well with our objectives. In that we probably don't want that much tolerance for invalid data. But this is not a problem in itself because SpringBatch is very configurable. You can configure it to fail or to recover. That we may not be using the framework to its full potential, but it's all a matter of configuration with SpringBatch. We also need, because we have automation, comprehensive logging and notification, so in case something goes wrong. And because we deal with large amount of data, performance is also important, especially to avoid disrupting the systems. These are some SpringBatch domain objects, just to tell you about how a SpringBatch job is structured. Jobs and I missed steps here. Yeah, but jobs and steps are both explicitly configured. The developer configures these objects directly. Jobs are run together with the parameters, and the combination of a job and the job parameters create a job instance. Job instance is just a uniquely identifiable job run that can possibly be restarted and whose life cycle ends on the first successful execution. So a job instance can have several executions. And for instance, one can pick up where the other one left in case it was stopped midway. The steps also have step executions, and one step can have several executions. And we have the job repository, which takes care of the persistence of the batch domain object. In particular, it persists, and you get, if you're using a database to persist, you'll see tables for job instances, job executions, job parameters, step executions, and context for step and job. For each step, there's a separate context, which is just a map of string and an arbitrary object. So there is one for each step, and there is one for the job itself that is global to the job. There are several types of steps. Tasklet step, which just executes a tasklet. A tasklet is just an interface with one method that says run and some parameters. And so tasklet step executes a tasklet possible multiple times, each time inside a different transaction. Partition step takes care of dividing a step into several small parts to distribute the load. So it uses a splitter, a handler, and an aggregator to put it back together. We have the job step that delegates a step to a completely different job, or even the same job. So it starts another job. And the flow step, which delegates to a flow, which is basically a set of state transitions. And then, so it's an initial state. Instead of state transitions, the transitions are matched based on a string. So after a portion of the flow, for instance, the step ends, it will exit with some exit status, and that will be used that will be used to decide the transition to follow. You can also have wildcards, and you can rewrite this exit status and implement complex logic for said transition using step execution listeners or job execution deciders. Which one? Well, depends on the circumstance, but.
I mentioned that the steps in a flow are sequenced in R.
Depends what you mean by that. What do you mean
So
sequence?
there's one step before the other. That's what a flow decides orally.
Yes, I mean you can also have a step that then runs other steps in parallel, but.
Okay. So it isn't necessarily sequenced.
Well, it's not necessarily sequence the steps, but from the point of view of the flow, what happens then in a separate in an inner step, it's another matter. But you have only one state at one point, and that's what's used to determine the transition.
Okay.
Chunk processing is a big part of SpringBatch. A chunk is basically just a collection of items that are grouped together according to some policy. Generally, the policy is simply just a fixed size, but you can implement whatever you want. Tasklet chunk-oriented tasklets generally delegate to 3 different types of objects: the item reader, item processor, and item writer. So the item reader reads one single item, the item processor processes each one item at a time, and the item writer then writes the whole chunk, so more than one item in general. If you want to implement restartability, that is, if you want your batch job to be able to stop in the middle of a chunked step and then restart from where it left, you need to implement item stream reader and item stream writer. What these do is they write some state into either the step or the job context, and then are able to read that context to be able to set the correct state. Each chunk is processed in a different transaction. This gets more complicated if you consider error conditions, so there's a relatively complex logic there, but I'm not going into detail on that. And item processors can be used not just for transforming items, but also from one type to the other, but also to do filtering and to do validation. And this validation can use the usual Spring validation strategies, including delegating into beans validation, JSR 303, I think. So why rewrite ETL with SpringBatch? Well, the main goal is maintainability. In SpringBatch, we have components available for several common operations, such as reading TSV files, reading data from JDBC cursors, mapping rows read into Java beans, stuff like that. Because we're using Spring, we can also easily swap level components. For instance, for supporting both Oracle and Postgres. It's a well-known technology, inside the company, Java, Groovy, and Spring. We have some structure that is encouraged by the framework, step, and so on. It's easy to debug, just like any other Java application. There is a social technical enforcement of conventions. For instance, we're using CodeNarc to enforce some conventions, and we have unit and functional tests. It's still possible to write crappy code, of course. You
have responsibility.
Yeah. Transmart-batch. Transmart-batch aims to implement transmart data loading operation with SpringBatch. We're using SpringBatch, we're using Gradle, SLF4j with the log backend. We're using Capsule for packaging, and in terms of database interactions, we're just using Spring JDBC, so no JPA or anything like that.
What's the SLF4j?
Sorry?
What's the SLF4j?
It's a logging framework. It's a facade for several logging backends, like Log4j or whatever. Instructions for usage are see the README. There are some. You need to prepare the database before you start loading data. in particular, because each chunk is passed in a different transaction, and this has restartability involved. It's important that the metadata about the job and the data itself is updated in the same transaction. So one way you could do this is using JTA to use two different databases, but it's just simpler to have the SpringBatch database for the repository in the same database as your main database. So this means that we have to create a schema in the current database. And there is a Gradle job for this, but yes?
So why are we not using an object relational mapping framework?
Because it's more trouble than it's worth for. The only occasion where I really missed it was when updating patients. But for everything else, it adds complexity with no value.
Well, the value might be database language independent, so you can easily couple it with Oracle or Postgres.
Yes, but we mostly it's true, but it's not a problem in practice because the tables look mostly the same between Oracle and Postgres, and the insert statements are simple. It's a trade-off of complexity versus then ease of use for some cases, but we chose not to use any kind of ORM, at least for now. But I don't anticipate the need, to be honest.
But it will also be easier on the interface side.
Sorry?
If you're using the same objects to load the data, then you can also use the same objects to query the data.
Well, but right now we don't have. I mean, we do have some mapping on the Grail side, namely on transmart-DB. But transmart-DB is a Grails application, and using GORM outside of a Grails application is not really easy. And we're also inserting, and then we would have. I mean, it would just create some complication that we don't want, and we would have to synchronize the two projects would have to be in sync. I mean, you first of all, CoreDB is not even supposed to be any sort of public API, so now you would be depending on, you would be restricted on what you could do in CoreDB, that you could not then change the mappings there, change the name of properties, etc., because you would break transmart-batch. It's just a dependency that we would like to avoid.
Makes sense.
Right? Right now we have one job implemented, the clinical data job, and it supports right now only Postgres. I'll get to that later. So it supports transmart data style clinical params. Unless you want to invoke this in a more manual fashion, you need to have the clinical params file inside a directory with the study name. It's implemented with one path through the data. This is something that, in retrospect, was probably not the best option. And, I was the one who pushed more for it. So and the reason is that, well, there are several reasons, but one of them is mentioned here. It's more difficult to support restart because patient concept sets are kept only in memory and outside of the context, and because you can only know which concepts and which patients you are going to insert after you've read all the facts. So what happens is that if you have an error in the middle of inserting facts, then you will have patients and concepts that will never be inserted, because these are inserted after the facts, because we only know the set after we read all the facts. So you'll get facts that refer to inexistent patients and concepts. There are also other things that it makes more complicated. Validation can only happen midway the job. So if we haven't read the main data, in a previous step, then what happens is we may find invalid data in the middle of inserting the fact. And it just makes more difficult to write decoupled code. Because at the same time you're reading the facts, you have to worry about updating the patients and the concepts. But besides, it supports cross-trial association, which I'll talk later. If there are patients and concepts that already exist, it will use them and will update the demographic data for patients. This is what the main flow for the clinical data looks like. We start by reading the control file, so word mapping, color mapping, and cross trials mappings. Then we read the current state in the database. So we gather current patients, current concepts, and current X trial nodes. We delete some data that we're going to be replacing, so concept counts and observation facts. This currently deletes too much data, but so if you want to upload a portion of a study and then another portion, you cannot do this right now. Then we have the main step that inserts the clinical facts, and then we have the insertion of the metadata, so concept counts, concepts, patients, on-patient trial, non-patient dimension. This is just this first method here, read control files flow, this first bean. This is definition for this bean. So we have a parallel flow for reading the variables, the word maps, and the X trials mapping file. This is how I implemented the reading of the X trials using a chunk oriented tasklet with the reader and the writer. But this one is just a batchlet. It is something I want to refactor because it doesn't read TSV files really well. It just splits on tabs. And this is the main step. The step that inserts the fact. It's also a chunk-oriented step. So this has the processor is a composite processor, so which is one after the other. So first replaces it reads just the raw line from the input file. This word replace does the replacement in word mapping file, and then this row to fact set converter does several things, and this is what I mentioned before. It fills in demographic variables for the patient, because when reading the facts we know more about the patient because there are some specific special demographic variables. It identifies concepts that will be created later on. So for categorical variables, we only need the nodes. We only know the nodes that we need to insert after we read the facts, because we get new values for this categorical variable in the middle, and converts the row into facts that are ready to insert into observation fact. Small note here about cross-trial. There is a new parameter in clinical params called X-trial file that should point to a TSV file. This TSV file is a file with two columns. One is a study prefix, the other is the X-trial prefix. So this is the concepts on the normal tree without the study ID and the public studies or private studies or whatever. And this is the prefix on the across trials tree. So when it finds a fact, when it's going to write a fact, it will look for its concept and look at the concept path for that concept, and try to find the longest prefix, study prefix that matches this concept path. If it finds one, it will remove the prefix, just leave the suffix, and append this suffix to the X-trial prefix. So if we get subjects ethnicity male, it will try to find an XML node called demographics HTML. This is the Caucasian. It will try to find an XML node called demographics race Caucasian. If it doesn't find it, it will give a warning. If it finds it, but the type is different, so text versus numerical, it will give an error, but it won't abort. It will just leave no. It will just log an error. If there is no prefix matching, it won't give any notice. At least, maybe on debug level, but. Finally, future work. We have some items on the to-do list right now. One I mentioned already, it'd be nice to refactor the DSV reading of word mappings and column mappings. Having a more, improving some aspect of the clinical trial job to make it more robust. This is maybe a bit debatable, but in any case, we need either more validation or being more permissive instead of just throwing exceptions that are difficult to parse. Support for Oracle, we basically need to implement two classes for Oracle. One to reserve sequences and another to update the concept counts. It's not a big deal. Insertion of high dimension data, but there are some plans to implement mRNA and RNA-seq. And finally, modular backup trial job. This is something that's commonly done. It's reversing the insertion of clinical and other data. And we want to be able to say, so we want each module for each data type to know how to remove its own data without having just a central backup trial option. And that's so that then we can also say we want to remove only this kind of data and that, instead of just removing everything by calling the backup trial procedure or just issuing specific SQL statements. That's it.
Okay.
Questions?
Shall we do first do questions from the room, if there are any? Otherwise, we have some online.
I have one, but I'm still finding out what so.
You can unmute them if you want. But let's in the room. Any questions?
I have a comment. It's not a question about the support for Oracle. We didn't have time to finish support for Oracle for this presentation, but now it's way easier. I mean, the difference between Oracle and Postgres is just two classes. One that reserves sequences, and one query is a bit more complex and needs to be different for Oracle. So before we had the different kettle, the sort procedures, now we don't use any sort procedures, and the only difference is those two tiny classes.
And the sequence reserver is something that
Can we use?
will be used on all the, and the same thing for the concept count for that matter.
That's the other one. Okay.
Yeah.
I have a question from Terry. And his question is, can one set multiple alternative study prefixes?
Could you repeat the question? Because
I can maybe also unmute him. That's
Yeah.
Terry, please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yes?
Yeah. Mute yourself.
The question is, can one set multiple alternative study prefixes?
Multiple alternative, what does that mean? And then what?
Okay, I'll unmute Terry because that's hard to do.
Now he's muted. I unmuted him.
Okay, but let's.
So muting going on. Inception.
Okay, Terry, can you speak up?
Okay,
Hi, Terry.
I
Yes.
think I'm unmuted.
We can hear you now.
I had two questions. The first is, what thoughts have you had about verifying the loading with a comparison against the loading that we have already? In other words, how can we know for sure that we haven't missed something?
Well, you can start with some with some study, load them in the two ways, dump the database in the middle, and then try to compare it. I mean, when we started, Carlos did this exercise of trying to see the difference between the original one and the one he was developing. But right now we're not doing that exercise anymore, because we have also more functionality than the standard pipeline. Namely, we have the cross-trial support. And actually, going further, I would rather have a set of test cases to ensure that it works correctly than comparing to some defect to standard implementation. But I mean, we don't have any tests that try to call the cattle and then compare the two, for instance, if that's what you're asking.
And the second question was a more specific technical question. On the cross trials loading, is it possible, you mentioned that the loader picks the most specific study prefix. I infer from that it's possible to have multiple study prefixes for a cross-trial prefix. Is my inference correct?
The file I showed had several prefixes already, but you can also have overlapping prefix. So you can have a study prefix for demographics and another study prefix for demographics / race. And then if the study node starts with demographics whatever else, it will pick the first one. If it starts with demographic race, it will pick the second one.
Thanks.
Okay, very good. Any other questions online? Please unmute yourself if you have one.
Otherwise, I already have a couple.
Okay, go ahead.
So one question is, I think one of the problems with the old ETL framework was that it's very hard to debug. So how is that better with transmart-batch?
Well, it's better because you just have to attach IntelliJ. You just have to start run Gradle with the -- debug JVM, and then put your breakpoints there and debug from there. For debugging cattle, you would have to put breakpoints inside the cattle code, which you don't really know, and it's not really specific to your specific job. And for the stored procedures, yeah, you can also put the breakpoints inside the SQL developer or PG admin, but it's not very practical. I mean, you have to install an extension in case of Postgres. You have to compile your stored procedures with debug information in Oracle, and I mean, personally, and especially, what makes it even more difficult to debug is that the code is just not easy to understand. I mean,
yeah,
you can have the best tool, but if the code is opaque, there's not much you can do. I mean, there are queries inside the stored procedures that take whole screens and have multiple joins with the center, for instance, for building the concept paths. It's very difficult to understand.
Clear. Another question. One of the problems we had with the other framework, or the cattle plus the stored procedure, is it didn't really check the input data sanity always correctly. And I have seen multiple occasions of people like, Janneke, Lianne, spending hours and hours figuring out why the hell does an ETL work, and then it turns out that at the end it's really due to a specific Oracle table not accepting that specific field was 52 characters because it had a limit of 50, something like that, but you wouldn't possibly guess that problem from the output you get from cattle. So
Decent error report.
in the new framework, is there a way to do an input sanity check? And sorry?
Yeah, that might be related, but it's not.
Yeah, so my question would be, is there a place in the current transmart-batch implementation where you can start to put assumptions that you have on the sanity of the input data or in the form of the input data?
We don't have a lot of checks right now. But these checks can be done either in separate steps in case of some global checks, or if it's item by item. For instance, you're reading a mapping file and you want to validate a column, you can implement it in a processor. But we don't have the difficulty that we have with our design is that if we want to validate lines in the facts file, so in the main data file, is that we may find a problem just when we're already halfway through inserting lines into the database. And because we don't have restartability right now for the clinical data, this will mean that you'll have to start from the beginning.
How much effort will it be to refactor the framework to have two passes? One validation pass and then another.
You want a number of hours?
Yeah, preferably.
I mean, probably not that much. I mean, there would be some logic that we moved earlier, and we just wouldn't do the insertion, and then we'd do the insertion later. So the logic would be mostly the same for the current one, except doing no insertion and doing no conversion. And then so we basically divide the step into two, and duplicate the first part.
So do a dry run first.
Sorry?
Do a dry run first.
Yeah, yeah, sort of. So to build the demographic, to get demographic information, to know the concepts, and yeah, to do some sort of validation on the data.
Okay, wait. Let's make
another option is to make the job really restartable, but one has to be careful about that, because if we stop in the middle of a step, we have to make sure that then when we start that step, the number of rows that we skip are the same rows that we went through on the previous run. So it raises some more sometimes some difficult edge cases, but that would be another option. Make it restartable.
Okay, first let's move to Waigu, who's on the line. Why do you want to unmute yourself and?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine.
Just my question. I will just repeat what I type. Is there a possibility to do quality control on replicated records? Like what is the catalyst doing? Because they in the stored procedure they have some checking mechanism before they actually insert the data from the loading zone to the real table.
That this would be duplicated where? In the data file or in the column mapping?
In the data file, for example, someone by mistake gave the wrong ID twice, subject ID, or the combination of subject ID with it multiple times.
No, and it's the thing is we don't keep as we go through the file, we don't keep the file in memory. So what we could do is maybe hash something and then keep the hashes for each row, but we don't do any of that. We go through the file in a streaming fashion, and we don't know what we read before. What happened? What will probably happen if you have duplicated entries in the data file? It will get an integrity violation at the database because the primary key in observation fact includes the patient concept, and so if you insert the same combination more than once, you'll get a data integrity violation in the database.
I already saw that with the flat one file, apparently there were 2 genes that were twice in the platform file, and what happened was that in the gene expression file, those 2 rows were duplicated. So it's, so you had, instead of 1 row for the gene, you suddenly had 2 because there were duplicates in the platform file. That's ugly.
Yeah.
But this is a nice example. But so how, with the current implementation, how would I be noticed of this problem if I don't know that I have a duplicate row?
You would get an exception with the
description.
With the description saying that that the unique constraint was being violated in the database, but that would be the extent of the.
It would at least be a descriptive error then.
Yeah.
So if I understand correctly, this will be mainly used for loading data. The quality control part will be minimal compared to the cattle one, right?
Yeah, I don't know that much about what Cattle did to do a comparison, but I can tell you that at this point there is not that much validation on the input files.
But that can be done if we do it in this 2.
Yeah, I can, but would need I don't even have the requirements to.
All the checks that need to be done.
Yeah, exactly. So I have
so
no idea what would be useful and what not be useful. But
need to gather these first.
Well, things I saw was, for example, line endings that it didn't recognize, or a tab that was missing, or something. Just the normal layout of your files. If there's just one little mistake, you get an error. But sometimes, if you have a big file, it's after 45 to 50 minutes. So it would be nice that it says in the beginning, well, your file looks like crap. You need to change your line endings.
So we need to gather these quality controls.
Well, I see that people seem to be more interested in more validation than actually robustness and dealing with this kind of errors. And I see. Yes.
We could have a nice discussion somewhere offline, probably, if we need to build this into the same system and.
Or maybe a separate validation checker for input of transmart data.
That might be, a W3C kind of thing. Okay, let's move to Terry. Terry has some questions online.
Yeah. Let's see. Do you have a gut level feel for the expected performance? Is it roughly equivalent to the kettle scripts?
The performance, I haven't made any measurements, but
I just was wondering what your experience was.
You didn't use huge files?
I didn't use huge files, no. But I can tell you that I'm not exactly sure where are the bottlenecks in the current procedures, but I don't think the performance would be better because we do all the processing on our side, which is minimal actually, just matching one thing with the other, and then we just insert the data into the database to their final destination. So there are less inefficient queries inside procedures and moving data from table A to table B. So that could improve performance, but I mean I'm not making any. Definitive statements on that because I haven't made any measurements.
Okay. The other question was, are you ready for moving this out to get contributions from others in the community, or do you want to do a little more prototyping first?
Well, I think at least I think we need. If others find it useful and give feedback, it would be great. But this is not something that I would say it's production ready at this point. So we still need some to use it internally and iron out some and at this point there are even some design decisions that we may want to revisit, like the one path thing. So
it's far from stable, but you're welcome people helping you make it stable.
Yes.
And it's currently at our GitHub, right? The GitHub/Hyve.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Is that your answer to your question, Terry?
Yeah, thanks very much.
Great. Seth had a question here in the back.
Yeah, just more like a remark about previous question a while ago about if it would be easier for the user to find problems with their data that they're trying to import. As far as I know, as Gustav said, there's better advanced logging per step and per job. So I think it would be easier to track what specific input of a file goes wrong. Is that correct?
You can add the logging statement that you want.
I mean, you could like easier log. Okay, the row is too many characters, above 52 characters, for example.
Sure, you can implement the logging statements you want and checks that you want.
Yeah. So if you implement checks, we can also give logging for each step.
But does the logging allow you to, can you see which line was causing the trouble in the input file? The number of the line?
If you print it.
We are keeping
So
the
you can, but
we are keeping the information of the line that we read in the file.
Yes.
We are keeping that information
So you could
show it.
So it's easier.
And I know that the built-in TSV readers they pass to the line mapper the line number as well.
And we are keeping that.
Yeah.
Great. Wim?
Does it try to do automatic rollback if like it fails halfway?
It does rollback, but there's a rollback of only that task or that chunk. So in these jobs where you can implement your own rollback logic, of course, but a strict database rollback is done after a chunk fails, or if the step is not chunk oriented, after the tasklet fails.
Okay,
That's the only portion that's rolled back.
So you need to do it manually.
Yes, you cannot insert huge amounts of data into a database inside the same transaction. It will just not be efficient.
Yeah, it would be nice if it would start from have some logic that it can still try to remove what it did before.
Yeah, but the whole point is of transmart-batch that SpringBatch that you are then able to fix the problem and resume the job. Not so much restart from scratch.
So we need to make it restartable.
Yeah.
Can it show like a nice progress bar and how far the file already is with importing?
An animation maybe?
But
No.
the initial goal of this was just to replace.
Okay.
Not to just add a lot.
You can see the step where you are, but that's
It would be nice. Just on a website and then go to a specific URL and you see how far your file is with importing.
But that would be another advantage of this two passes, right? I mean, if you do a first pass, you know how many lines there are in the file, so you can track the progress.
In the second step, you can track
yeah,
the
if you were interested in that, yes, sure.
Yeah, I'm interested in that.
If it takes 1.5 hours,
Okay.
yes.
Another thing to mention, I think that it's easier to draw UI for SpringBatch, for transmart-batch than for cattle. Let's say, so it's possible to have UI on transmart for clothing.
Yeah,
right?
there's also a SpringBatch administration thing with the web UI. If anyone's interested, but we're now just running it from the command line and not showing any kind of.
We need local files, right? We need the files in the same file system where the server is running.
Yeah, right now, yes.
Okay, wait, we have 2 minutes left. I want to have one question from Venkata here. Venkata, please speak up.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're fine.
Yeah, just as a maybe naive question, if somebody loading the data parallel, is it complaints?
No. I mean, you can load data in parallel, but not for the same study right now. And actually, it may. The thing is, if you run the same job with the same parameters, it will refuse to do that. So you can only. But if someone says, but there's something called a job incrementer that sets the dummy parameter. That is incremented so that you can rerun a job with the same parameters in practice. So if two people do that, there's right now no locking mechanism. No.
Is it like locking and then loading, or putting in the queue or something?
No, there's nothing like that.
Okay. Yeah, maybe we should think. I don't know. Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't catch that, Fakata?
And actually, maybe we need to put this kind of some queuing, or I don't know, some kind of thing. If parallel transactions are going on while loading, maybe lock for the user until he finishes the transaction, and then the next person can load into the system.
Okay, good idea to think about, Venkata. Thanks. I have one question here I want to have from Kees de Jonge.
Do you already support special columns that may exist in the data file, like labeling columns, units columns?
Units? No, I don't think so. No.
Which you can provide in the column file.
In the data file.
In the data file, and they picked up. Well, at least now you can indicate that in the column file, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay, so not yet.
Is implemented.
No.
Also not the base.
One other thing that I implemented is the
something.
visit name. That's another thing that I implemented.
Yeah.
What do you mean with the race? You mean different?
Well, there are 3 variables that.
The race says age, that's picked up, right?
Sorry?
The race sex age.
Race age, whatever age.
Sex gender, yeah. Okay. Kees, do you want to wrap up?
How about incremental data loading? I think you mentioned something somewhere in the presentation that's not fully supported yet. So.
The problem with incremental data loading is that we need to know the exact semantics of it. So Ward prepares something and right now supporting the kind of incremental data loading that he wants, at least, would not be that much difficult. It would be just a matter of not deleting as much data as we're deleting right now.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I should share the link on that and see if we agree on that.
Yeah, see if we can review that proposal in community, see what others think on this.
Yeah. So, Wim, is it really important? Can you ask it to Gustavo afterwards? Because it's time.
It's kind of important.
Okay, well, make it very quick then.
Can you use an external reader or API, so you not only have clinical data, but you could get like a clinical data file or a VCF file, something that's well defined and where there is already like a reader available and also a validation checking available for.
Of course, you only need to write some adapters or to call that from SpringBatch artifacts.
Then you don't need to implement the reader logic and the validation logic yourself.
No, what we need to implement is just delegating to that reader, and if you want to have restartability, you need to be able to say to implement logic to save the state and then restore it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you very much, Gustavo. I'll send. We'll send the slides around to everyone on the community online. And I think we should stop by thanking Gustavo for his presentation. Okay, thank you very much. I'll end it here.
Is it recording?
It is recording.
Gustavo, I have a question. I don't know, it's just the ETL. I mean, I'm very rarely using this. But is it like really in the conventional ETL you are extracting data and then from the data and then you transform into some other data file and then you inserting? Are we still doing it or inserting one by one?
Not really for ETL, but we don't really do ETL. ETL generally involves getting data from different sources and merging it together and doing transformations. Our procedures are not really ETL procedures. So this is another reason why are we using an ETL tool like Catalan. Our logic is actually quite simple.
So this is like basically simply reading line by line in the file and then inserting per line as well.
Well, yeah. Well, there's a bit more than that. You have the patients,
there
the
is-
concept, etc. And you have to put that together.
But basically, we don't dump into a file and then this file and then put it all.
No, it's line by line. As we're reading the file, we're updating the patient.
Ik kan QuickTime niet terugvinden.
And then at the end
QuickTime.
we'll have all the patients and content and we'll write them in separate steps.
But what about the kettle version? Is it also doing it like that, line by line, or they dump it into a file?
The kettle job just writes all the nodes and not the nodes but the categories and the data in the landing zone, and then we call the start procedure
to put it. Okay.
Voor mij loopt ook alles vast.
Okay, clear.
Lekker dan. Ik heb Florian in beeld.
Dat is goed.
What is this? Is this yours?
Ja, dat is maar.
Simpel, Kees?
Ik denk dat het een hele goede kant op, denk ik.
Ja.
Ja, nog wel veel meer.
Het is niet zo.
Nee, je mist het.
Nee, ik kwam Rita tegen en die wilde ook alle dingen weten. En toen, ja, het was, had ik niet zoveel zin om.
Je dacht, het is toch al verloren.
Dus, maar Kees weet alles.
Ja, helemaal.
Dat is waar. Dat is waar.
SpringBatch.